Hola, I'm Julie Dzerowicz. I'm the Member of Parliament for Davenport. I'm coming to you live from 1202 Bloor Street West, and I'm here with Sergio Ruivo, a chartered accountant in the Davenport community. He's also a contabilista en la comunidad. So he's here to answer questions about the capital gains tax. And so I want to say a warm welcome to you, Sergio. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me, Julie. I'm glad to be here.
Did I say contabilista?
Oh, that was excellent. That was an excellent pronunciation.
Thank you. Anyways, maybe we could start off. What is a capital gains tax?
Well, capital gains tax is basically a tax, but it's on a certain income that people define as capital gains. So it's basically how much you make from selling something that's usually of a capital nature, like a stock or a piece of real estate. It's the difference between what you bought it for and what you sold it for. That is a capital gain.
Okay, so just in plain language, Sergio, because you know I like plain language. It's if I bought a car for $20,000, I sold it for $30,000. The capital gain is $10,000.
That is true. That is true. Yes.
Okay, so just it's when you're buying something and it's usually some sort of an asset or thing. It could be a house, it could be a car, it could be stocks. You know, stocks in the stock market, and it is a capital gain is whatever profit you made from between what you bought and you sold it at. Okay.
Correct.
Now, budget 2024. So the federal budget just introduced a change to the capital gains inclusion rate. Okay?
That's correct.
So can you explain to our listeners, and I'm sure there are many, about what's the change?
So the change was basically the inclusion rate is what percentage of the gain is subject to tax. So up until now and for the last roughly 25 years, if you made $100 in terms of a capital gain, only 50% of that gain was subject to tax at whatever marginal rate or tax rate you would pay personally or the corporation would pay. So that amount, 50%, has now been changed to 67% or 2/3 for gains above $250,000. So this new additional tax based on the revised inclusion rate kicks in for gains above $250,000. So if your gain is still below $250,000 in a given year, you're still only going to pay tax on 50% of the gain.
So in the example I had told you about, I bought a car at $20,000, I sell it at $30,000, I gain $10,000. I'm going to get an exemption of $250, so it's within the $250, so I'm not going to be taxed.
That is true. Most likely, if you just sell things and you're under $250,000, so you sold some stocks, you sold some other assets, you're good. But if you were to sell a large asset that you bought a long time ago, like an investment property that you can't really divide by years, then maybe you will be affected if your gain is over $250,000.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because I think this affects many people in our community. So in my community of Davenport, I have a lot of people within the Portuguese community, so to other ethnic communities as well, but within the Portuguese community, I know they bought their principal house, which, and we should mention this and reiterate, this capital gains tax does not impact ever on your principal residence.
That's correct.
Okay.
It does not affect that.
But if many of those in the Portuguese community, they bought an additional house. So say one of my neighbors, and I know this is to be true, they have their principal house on my street, and then what happens is they bought another investment house just to rent out in the 1980s. And so they bought in the 1980s, and now they're thinking about selling it, okay? So let's take them through what actually changes on the capital gains tax. So let's say that they bought the house for $100,000 in 1980, and they want to sell it for $1 million right now. Can you take us through what has changed in terms of the capital gains that they will be receiving back?
So in that particular example, and it would probably be an example that could be applicable to a lot of immigrants, in particular Portuguese immigrants that placed a lot of faith in real estate, and that's where they chose to invest many moons ago. Some of them in the 80s. So things were cheaper in nominal dollars back then. So in that case, if you bought it for $100,000 and you're going to sell it for $1 million, I guess if you had a $900,000 gain, $250,000 of that gain would be taxed at only 50% in terms of the inclusion rate, and the remaining amount, which would be around 550,000, would be taxed at 2/3. So there would be an additional tax on the amount above 250 for the gain.
So the way I say it, I know you call it additional tax, but I call it you get less profit, or you get less gain.
That's true. That's another way of putting it. Yes.
From getting it.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's important for us to note, already there's a capital gains inclusion rate, which is 50%.
Correct.
So that already exists.
That already exists.
And that we had a capital gains inclusion, like tax, for lack of a better word, since 1971, right?
1971 is when the capital gains started to be taxed in Canada. Correct.
Okay, and then I believe in the 80s it went up to 75%.
It did. For a time it was 75% taxable, and then it dropped down to 67, and then within the last 25 years it's been 50.
And so now we're bringing back to 2/3.
Correct.
Where it was more or less in the 90s.
Correct.
Okay, so it's been there, and in other countries they do the same thing. They do capital gains.
Capital gains are always taxed in every developed country. It varies, but typically the inclusion rate can be anywhere from very low tax countries, and maybe it's 30, 35 up to 75. So it varies. In the U.S.,
it's higher.
It's in certain states it's actually higher than 2/3. So it's not necessarily always going to be less than what it is here. In Portugal, I can tell you that it is 50%.
It is
50%.
So let's go back to the example, because you were saying, okay, if you bought a house, so you have your principal residence, that is exempted, this will not impact you. But if you have an investment property, you decide you're going to sell, you bought it for $100,000, it's now selling for $1 million, you have $900,000, and then what you could do is, you said $250,000 annual exemption.
Yeah.
So, but if I'm a couple, so my husband and I are selling it, we each get an exemption of $250 each.
That's right. So if it's a couple it could be owned by 3 people, then each person would be able to use their $250 exemption, $250 rate, where the tax would only be 50%. So if it's a couple, then if essentially $500,000 could be taxed at 50%, and then the rest at the higher rate. So it's not, a lot of people still are a couple, and if they're still alive, then that's good. Yes.
So that's good. So a couple will get in their first $500,000 of the $900,000 will be taxed at the existing 50% rate,
That's
and then
correct.
the rest, which is $400,000, will be taxed at the 2/3 rate, so 66%. Now, what is this 1.25 million lifetime capital gains exemption?
So if you go back in history, the reason why the rate was dropped to what is because this lifetime capital gains exemption was brought in many moons ago, and then it's not for a general purpose. It's only meant to exempt business shares that meet certain criteria. So if I have a business and I want to sell that business and I sell the shares, you used to be able to get up to $1 million of that capital gain was totally tax exempt. So similar, if I had a farm, or if I had a fishing rights, if I was a fisherman, you'd be able to sell your fishing license and you would be able to be exempt up to $1 million. That has now been increased to $1.25 million.
So now we're getting into shares and companies. So that
those are shares where you're actually running the business, you're active in the business. So it's meant to foster innovation and to allow for those businesses maybe to be sold or to transfer to the next generation, and therefore not to be a huge tax burden on the transfer of those businesses.
So to me, Sergio, I'm going to park on that for a minute, just because I want to go back to the homes and the individuals. Sergio, what I'm hearing from you is that for the most part, it's really not going to impact, like this isn't really going to change a lot of people's lives unless they're planning on selling their investment property, right? And I know one of the things that our federal government did is we kind of said that this only impacts 0.013% of the population. So I think what happens is the impression that we gave people was that only the most richest people will actually be impacted by this. But the truth is, anybody, and there's a lot of working class people in my community who have investment income.
Correct. They don't necessarily invest in the stock market or have. I mean, they might have some capital gains through their RSPs or RIFs or other, but they don't generally buy and sell huge amounts of shares and have capital gains. But they will buy an investment property or two, and then when they are sold, an investment property you can't really cut up into pieces, or at least I don't believe the rules permit you. So when you sell it, you sell it. You can't really just sell 20% this year, 20% next year. So, it's sold all in one thing, but, you can do some planning, and if you talk to a professional, there's ways to mitigate the tax bill by maybe not selling everything in 1 year, maybe selling one house in 1 year, waiting a couple of years to sell the other house. So there are things you could do to, save a little money, so it's not as bad as it may seem at first.
So go see your local wonderful accountant who might be able to provide you with some advice.
Correct.
Although, so we're hearing it's not going to impact everyone. They can sort of do some planning, which is great. I think one of the things I'd want to say to anyone who's listening is that the reason our government is doing this is because, taxes in Canada actually go back to the population. They go back through our healthcare programs, keeping our communities safe, climate change programs, a number of other programs that we do to, make Canada the great country that it is today. So what I want to just remind people is that, after the pandemic, the federal government took on a lot of debt because we were very supportive of lots of programs. But as we continue to move forward, we want to make sure that we manage our deficits and we manage our debt levels, and that means we have to make sure we do fair taxation.
Correct.
And so that is the reason we're doing what it is that we're doing. For those that don't know, we've recently, over the last couple of years, introduced a national child care plan, a national dental care plan, and this year we've introduced a pharmacare plan. So we have another question, Sergio.
Certainly.
What do these tax changes mean for my retirement savings?
Well, assuming that the retirement savings are based upon the sale of an investment property, I guess, there are certain things that you might want to do to mitigate the higher tax bill. What you could do, if you're under 72, you could, and you have a lot of unused RSP room, you could make a large contribution before you're 72 when you have a transaction that's large and it creates a large tax bill. So that can be done to save or defer a bit of tax. And ultimately, it just might require a little bit of planning, so you might not be able to count on as much profit as you might have thought initially when the investment property was going to be sold. But if you crunch the numbers, roughly speaking, if you're at the top marginal rate, it's going to cost you on $100. You used to be paying $25. Now on gains over $250, you'll be paying $33. So it's really $8. So, some people might think $8 is a lot, Julie, and some people might not think $8 is a lot. But there are certainly things that you can do to at least reduce it or make it not as bad an experience as one might think it might be.
Okay, so I'm going to actually rephrase that because, you are a very sophisticated individual with great tax advice and background. So what do these tax changes mean for my retirement savings? The first thing I would say is, in general, if you have no assets and you're not thinking about selling and you don't have an investment home or anything, this means nothing.
Correct.
Okay? There's going to be no changes for your retirement savings. You are A-okay. It's only if for some reason you worked at a job, it didn't have any benefits, but you had an investment income, and that investment income was going to be your retirement. Okay, so that is what Sergio was going through in terms of an example, okay? And so what I took away, and I'm going to simplify what you said, and this is what we do, sort of, simplify it to sound bites, Sergio, is that if you are retiring and your investment property was your retirement savings, you are going to get less of your sort of profit that you would have made on your investment property when you sell it, but there are ways for you to work with your accountant, with a professional who will be able to help you to minimize the reduction that you would get in the increase of the inclusion rate.
But typically for older people, they're really living off the rental income of an investment property. So when they're saying, if the rental income is part of your retirement plan, then really it only becomes an issue, unfortunately, when you pass away and maybe you want to pass on the house to your children. So that's basically when the tax bill will hit. But estate planning is always something that is required, because generally speaking, most of the tax bill hits when you pass away.
If 66.6% is now taxed, how exactly have taxes not gone up? Well, so I'm going to take a stab and then you're going to take a stab.
You take a stab at that, Julie.
So, first of all, there's already capital gains. So again, this capital gains tax inclusion rate only applies if you have some investment property here in Canada that you sell, and only if you're making profit that is more than $250,000 a year if you're single, and $500,000 a year if you are married. So that's first. Two, what I would say to you is already there was a capital tax inclusion rate of 50%. So whatever investment you sold, you're already going to be taxed at 50%. What we have done here is we have increased it from 50% to 66.6%. And so the way I would say it is that you get less of your profit when you are selling an investment. But Sergio, because he's an accountant and uses particular words,
I may say it's a tax increase.
It was a
I
tax
may
increase.
say it,
That's
but
okay.
you know what? Your way of looking at it is valid as well, Julie.
Thank you. So, how about if you take a stab at answering the question? How exactly have taxes not gone up?
Well,
66% is the new tax.
I would say that from a pure perspective, the tax rate has not gone up. So the tax rates are the marginal tax rates that one would pay. So if you're earning more than $175,000, excluding surtaxes, you're paying around 53–54% in Ontario. So that rate hasn't gone up. What has gone up is the inclusion rate. So at one point, only 50% of a capital gain was taxable. Now it's 2/3, over 250. So the tax rate has not gone up per se, but the inclusion rate has gone up. So effectively, yes, you are paying more taxes, but it depends on what you're referring to, the inclusion rate or the tax rate. Ultimately, it does wind up to be a slightly higher tax bill, but the tax rates are still the same, because the tax rates are the same for all types of income. So, interest income, salary income, those are all taxed at 100%. It's just capital gains, because it used to be my favorite type of income, Julie. I'd be lying if I told you it wasn't.
Well,
It was only taxed at 50%.
So again, capital gains only applies if you have some sort of investment that you are selling. If this is your principal home, that is not taxed at all. If we're talking about your salaries, your taxes are not going up on your salaries. All we're doing is we're talking about capital gain, any type of profits you make if you're about to sell some, like an investment property or shares or some sort of, big equipment. But maybe before we go on to the next.
There's a positive question, Julie, right there.
Well, actually, what I was going to do, this has completely thought. I actually wouldn't mind if you talked about
Yes, so if
Part two,
you're,
which is about a business, small business.
So-
But there's different rules and different
Correct.
changes in budget 2024. If you could go through the two key things, and this is good news for you small businesses, because we want to support our small businesses here in Canada.
so to foster innovation and to, reward people that create active businesses within which they work and with which they give employment to other people, there has been a tax benefit that has been extended to those people, because those shares of qualifying small business shares, so these are businesses that are developed and, after 15, 20 years or more, the owner wants to sell, now he won't be taxed on the capital gain of those shares. So up until now, only $1 million was exempt. That's been increased to 1.25 million, and there's a new $2 million Canadian entrepreneurs incentive that will phase in over the next, I think, 10 years, where an extra 2 million could be exempted. So in theory, if you were to sell a business and it had a gain of 3 million 10 years from now, you could be in a position where you would effectively pay no tax on that gain, which is good, because you've created a business, you've created employment, and it's rewarding people for innovation and job creation. So I think that's positive.
So for entrepreneurs,
Yes.
only above 6.25 million would entrepreneurs pay more taxes.
Correct. You would have to hit that. That's the sort of the indifference point.
So that means they would have to make 6.25 million in capital gains or in profit in order to actually be paying more taxes. Well, that's pretty good.
Yep, that's very good. Yeah.
So you think that's a good news story?
That is a good news story for small business owners and entrepreneurs that want to use their business as their retirement source of funds when they retire. And then it certainly allows them to keep a large part of that of the proceeds when the business is sold. That's correct.
So it says here, what are the potential locations for small business owners and their investments? I'm assuming we've answered that question.
Correct. So it's not for general investments, but it's for people that own at least 10% of the shares of a private business, and they have to meet a few conditions. But it would impact those people, particularly people that could be family, where you're starting the company and they're investing in you as a business owner, and they invest money for shares of that company, and then 10 years from now things go well and they're able to get their money out. So you don't necessarily have to be there doing all of the work, but if you're an investor in a private company, yes, it could be of potential benefit to you as well.
So just in terms of us winding down, just because I know that we probably have hundreds of people looking at us right now, just responding and looking and listening to the very important.
Thousands of people, Julie. Thousands of people.
It's okay. We'll take it. We'll take whoever is listening. I mean, even one person would be helpful. Look, here's what I want to make sure we're clear to everyone. With this capital gains inclusion rate change, your principal home remains. Your tax-free savings accounts, your pension all remain exempt from the capital gains taxation, right? Home, tax-free savings, pensions all exempt from capital gains taxation.
Well, pensions are taxed at normal rates because it's normal income, but yes. But it's not subject to capital. It's subject to regular tax.
But regular, but not if this capital gains inclusion rate changed.
It doesn't affect your pension income. No, correct.
So exactly. Just want everybody to know that, be clear. Do not worry. Your pensions are going to be impacted. Your tax-free savings account won't be impacted. Your principal house will not be impacted. Now, you know how we've said that. One of the quotes that we often say is 99.87% of Canadians will not pay more tax on capital gains in any given year. I think the reason we say that is very few people actually have, actually sell properties. Many people think about it, Sergio.
Yeah,
they like the thought of it. Like,
correct.
If I cash this or if I sold this house, maybe I could sort of I'd make a lot of profit. I'd
Small
live.
investors sell properties once in a while or when they pass away. So it's not something typically they do. Very wealthy people that have large stock portfolios buy and sell shares every year, and they would have significant capital gains. And if they made more than $250,000, then they would pay, more. But those are I guess that's the 1% that was initially envisioned as being the target.
0.013% who actually sell. So, Sergio, in wrapping up, what advice would you have for anybody who might continue to have some questions about the capital gains inclusion rate, or where would you advise them to try to get some more information?
Well, I would say that if you're planning to make a large sale of an investment property that you've had for many, many years, then I would say, give it some thought and try to figure out when is the best time to sell, and what things could be done to sort of mitigate or reduce the tax burden, if there are options to explore them. Talk to somebody, and then essentially try to find out what the tax bill is, so that your family or your estate or you yourself know what will be taxed, and that you prepare for it, and it doesn't come as a shock. But the more planning you do, the better things go, and there are always things that can be done beforehand to make things a little bit smoother.
So in plain language, Sergio,
Yes.
it sounds like if you're planning on selling your investment property, or any property that you might wonder whether or not they will be, any investments that you think might be subject to this capital gains tax, consult some professionals. When I'm selling a house, I go to a real estate agent, I go to my banker, I go to a lawyer, and then also I happen to be privileged to have an accountant. I would go to my accountant as well. So I tell people there's good information from your local banks. Your real estate agents probably will have some additional sort of information. All the people that you generally consult with, I think, will be able to help you, as well as your friendly neighborhood member of parliament. Feel free to go to your friendly neighborhood member of parliament who's also able to give you some really great advice. Sergio, I just want to say thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Julie. It was a pleasure being here with you, and thank you once again.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us. Bye.